Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh. So pada kali ini saya share beberapa video untuk pengenalan tentang pengeditan gambar dengan menggunakan Lighroom. Okay, so daripada video ni korang akan dapat macam mana nak dapatkan satu tone color, cara menggunakan Lightroom dalam pengeditan gambar. Okay, terutama sekali dalam smartphone. Okay, untuk kali ni korang ikut saja apa yang ada dalam video ini. Okay, so watch out.
Hey guys, Ryan here at Signature Edits, and inside of today's Lightroom tutorial, we just might change the way you edit your photos forever. Yes, I know that's a big promise, but every once in a while I come across a new technique inside of Lightroom that just blows my mind and totally changes the way that I'm editing my photos, and when I come across that kind of technique, I want to share it with you, and I really think this is a game changer. So, are you ready? Let's get into it. Alright, so let's get started with this tutorial. As I said before, it's probably going to change the way that you edit your photos in a really, really good way, and it's going to unlock some amazing colors and tones in your images that you just didn't really know you had access to before. Now, before I go much further, I know that I can sometimes go a little bit fast for people, so if you have trouble understanding what I'm talking about, it's going too quick for you, just hit Shift and the comma key on your keyboard. Shift comma will slow down my voice, and likewise Shift period will speed up playback inside of YouTube, okay? So don't leave me comments about how I'm going too fast. You can just slow it down or speed it up, and life is brilliant. Okay, with that out of the way, we're going to dive in today to this tutorial, and primarily we're going to be looking at camera calibration. Now, I know this doesn't really sound like this amazing new trick that you've never heard of before. You probably know a little bit about camera calibration. You know, you slide these little sliders, it changes the colors, you add some saturation, but most of us, including myself until very recently, don't really understand what is happening when we're adjusting these sliders. We just know, you mess around and it makes things look different. But unless you really know what these sliders are doing, it's hard to unlock all of the kind of creative potential that's inside of here. So we're going to dive in and kind of dissect what's going on in each of these sliders, how to get the very best out of the calibration menu, and how to unlock some amazing tones you didn't even know you had inside of your images. Okay, now before we can get to the fun stuff, obviously I'm going to have to explain some technical fundamentals, but don't let that bore you, don't tune out. This is really, really important, because if you don't understand the fundamentals, you're not going to be able to use this tool properly, and you won't be able to unlock the kind of power that's really in here. So please, 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 just give me an extra couple of minutes to go through here as quickly and simply as I can and explain what's going on with these settings. So what exactly is camera calibration? That's the question we probably need to ask ourselves, and the answer to that is sort of complicated. And the reason it's complicated is because Adobe, for whatever reason, has refused to put anything on their website that addresses camera calibration. I've checked, I've searched, there is no mention of it whatsoever. The only thing that there is a mention of is your camera color profile. Now, you've probably seen this in your Lightroom before, where you can go in and select different color profiles that determine how Lightroom interprets the blacks, the whites, the shadows, and the colors of your different images. So for example, I have some different color profiles I've custom made for Signature Edits, and then there's the Adobe RAW profiles, and you can also select if you have an image taken with a specific camera. It should show different camera profiles for that particular image. So here's camera matching. For this camera, we can select the different profiles. And so part of the reason that different cameras have different colors present in their images is because of the way they interpret the colors through their camera profile. So that's how you set that, and then the camera calibration tab down here with these other little settings is for fine-tuning those adjustments, fine-tuning the colors in your image depending on the specific lighting condition. So to really understand this, let's look at this little graph here. And don't get scared, it's actually pretty simple. This is basically a representation of different wavelengths of light depending on the light source. So if we look at our fluorescent example here, you can see that in fluorescent light, you have a lot of green and a lot of orangey kind of reds, and not much of anything else, with some peaks in the blues and the aquas, right? Whereas our noon daylight example has lots of pretty much everything. It's a lot more level curve, with a deep fall off in the reds and the violets. There's not as much red or violet in a noon daylight lighting condition. Same for early morning, very similar, but even more level, except you've got more reds and more purples. So the ratio is going to be different. That's why sunset and sunrise, early morning and late evening, are going to have much deeper reds and purples in general, and we get those really deep red purple skies, right? So the camera calibration panel actually allows us to compensate for these different issues in lighting. So if you ever have an image that has this weird color cast and white balance just doesn't seem to make it look right, camera calibration is going to be your best friend. For example, if we're shooting in a fluorescent lighting condition, we know that the greens are going to be way too saturated, and probably the oranges and the reds too. So we can go in here and we can grab the saturation of our greens, and we can take the saturation down. And you'll see that as we do that, it's taking the saturation of everything down in this image, not just the greens, but it's doing more to the greens than anywhere else. So that's the difference in these different saturations. As you adjust the red, it will take mainly red saturation down, but it will affect everything else. It's going to be transparent. Whereas if we have the HSL saturation here and we targeted the reds, it would just take saturation out of the reds and the reds alone. Okay, so let's head back here to our calibration and head over to an image example for you. I've got this photo right here of our model taken around sunset. This is a completely raw file, and you can see that her skin is just super orange and unnatural. Now, white balance is going to do an amazing job helping to fix that. We can take it down to maybe around there and maybe add a little bit of magenta. But that's about all we can do, and any further it's just going to not work. It makes the blues too blue, or it makes the yellows too yellow, or you kind of get what I'm saying here. So we're going to take it as far as we can get it with the white balance, and then go down to our calibration, and we can adjust. So right now, to my eye, it looks like we've got way too much blue going on in this image. And probably the reason for that, if we consult our chart here, is because we're right around morning/sunset, and that's going to mean that there are more blues and purples and reds in this image than there are around the afternoon. So that's why we've kind of got that bluish cast in the shadows of this image. So we can compensate for that by grabbing the saturation of our blues and pulling that back. And you'll see it's affecting the saturation of everything, but just because I leveled out the saturation, now things look a lot more natural than they did before. Here's before and here's after. All of a sudden, everything just seems to be a lot more natural. Now we can go in here and we can adjust the reds of her skin, which still has kind of a green cast to it. And we can grab that red and adjust in here just a little bit like that. Now, what's the difference between doing the reds like this with the hue and doing the reds in the hue saturation luminance panel? That's a great question. For starters, the red panel in the HSL is going to adjust only the reds, and the oranges, only the oranges, whereas the calibration panel, let's reset this, is going to adjust everything. Watch as I change the red hue. It changes the blues, it changes the oranges, it changes everything. And what's really going on when we adjust the hue with the calibration panel is we're adding more orange pretty much to everything. We're just weighting red towards orange this way. So you can see that we've added orange in this direction, but we have also added our kind of orange-yellow. It's extending in the direction of the greens as well. So it's changing the color of everything, not just the reds. So that's the biggest difference there. You got to think of calibration is really fine-tuning it for the lighting conditions, whereas HSL is more fine-tuning it for your editing style most of the time, practically speaking. Okay, let's jump back into our image here. Obviously, we've desaturated things, so I'm going to add some more saturation back into the reds, just a little, and into the greens. Now, why add it in both instead of just one? As we mentioned before, when you adjust the saturation in one of these, it's going to weight it more towards that specific color. So if we do equal amounts across both of them, we'll add saturation everywhere. Of course, we could have just gone up to the top saturation and added a blanket saturation overall to everything. You just kind of have to experiment a little bit to figure out what works best for that specific image. Okay, so here is our before calibration and after. You can see what a massive difference that made in just correcting for the kind of strange lighting cast we had in this image. Let me show you another example. This one was taken at a concert, and we've got a tungsten light of some sort coming down onto our artist here. Now you can see his skin is very yellow, and we can start by adjusting the white balance. So grab that, pull it back. That's looking better already. And we could maybe try and add a little bit of magenta to counteract the tungsten. But the skin, to me, still looks a little bit off. It's a little bit too yellow, too green. So let's go down to our calibration, and we're going to adjust our reds a little bit. So just take our hue, just like that. You can see here's before, and here's after. Okay, now we can go one step further and take this shadows tool, which is going to add saturation to the magentas or add saturation to the greens, depending on which way we pull it. So in this direction, it's going to take saturation out of the magentas and add it to the greens. And in this direction, it's going to take it out of the greens and add it to the magentas. And because we happen to have a purple background here, it's going to really make our subject pop, because as we add deeper saturation to this color, our subject is going to have more contrast in color from the background and pop out of there. So here's before and here's after. Great. Let's head over to another indoor example here. This is just a JPEG image, not even a RAW file. And we're going to go and just adjust our white balance here. And one of the places that you'll find the very most use for the camera calibration tool is when you're doing nighttime work, because sometimes white balance just doesn't do enough. We've still got a weird color cast going on our model's face. So I'm going to go to calibration here and take that shadow tint up towards magenta just a bit. So here's before and after. And you'll notice we added a lot of contrast because we suddenly made these areas more magenta instead of everything being kind of green. And that just adds contrast and pop to our image. Now we're going to go down to our reds and tweak them probably away from yellow towards magenta a little bit. Bring the saturation down. And greens bring the saturation way, way down. Now we'll add the saturation back in the blues. And you can see how much more natural her skin looks. Here's before and here's after. Now, I'm not saying this is the perfect edit, and we're working with a JPEG image that has actually already probably had some editing done to it, but you can see how we can correct for these kind of issues. So here's another one where we've got a street light, and you can see that even when we go in here, let's zoom in, hello, grab our white balance, and maybe set a little cooler, take our tint, take that up to here, or so, zoom back out. Okay, we're looking all right, but his skin still doesn't look kind of the way that I want it to. If I warm the whole image up, which I think the rest of the image needs, his skin is now way too yellow and way too green. So we're going to go down to our camera calibration, and we'll compensate for that greenish tungsten light by taking our greens and shifting it maybe towards green instead of yellow. So you can see that difference right there. Grab the saturation, bring the saturation down in the greens, and then we can maybe add a little saturation in the reds and the blues. Now, which one you need to do in which circumstance is kind of going to depend a little bit, so experimentation is probably going to be your best bet. And of course, it all comes down to what you want your image to look like in the first place. There are two ways to use this camera calibration panel. We can use it to correct for lighting situations, which is what it's originally designed for, or we can use it to add stylistic colors to our image. So for example, we could take our colors and make his skin totally orange. That's not natural, but if it looks good to you and that's the edit you're going for, you can use it that way. You got to think of calibration kind of like the EQ system in your car. So you've got your stereo, and we all know that your stereo has those EQ buttons, but very few of us know what they're actually for, which the EQ system is meant to tune those speakers to the specific listening environment of your car, because those speakers will sound different in your car than they would on your desk or in your room or something like that. So we can take the acoustics of our car and we can balance the EQ to make that music sound the way it was originally produced and meant to sound. Okay, so the same thing comes to the calibration. We want to think about, okay, what is the actual lighting conditions going on in here, and how do we balance it out, given our different greens, reds, and blues, which combine to make up all of the different color combinations in our image. Now we're going to go through a few more images together and show you some creative ways that you can use the calibration panel. If this video has been helpful for you so far, do me a huge favor, hit that like button and leave me a comment below. Just say, thank you, or tell me a funny joke. I don't care. It really helps the YouTube algorithm and gets the word out there. I'd love to share this tutorial with as many people as possible. Okay, with that out of the way, now that you've hit that button, let's go ahead here and grab a couple more images and just show you a few examples of where this can be applied. So let's look at this photo right here. We've got a beautiful pond and a beautiful couple. We're going to go in here and just adjust the white balance, warm things up. Okay, and we've got a really huge green cast going on because we've got all of these leaves and green grass reflecting light onto the skin tones here, as well as the entire environment. Everything is green. So let's go into our calibration and we'll just offset for that. So we'll start with our greens. I'm going to pull the green saturation up, the exact opposite of what you would expect. Because this is a little trick I've found. For some weird reason, if you pull the saturation of the blues down, you'll see that in addition to saturation going down, everything just seems to get darker, except for skin tones seem to be left brighter. So what's kind of interesting about this, if we pull our reds back here, kind of to an appropriate place, maybe say around there, and our blues, let's just double back a little bit, you can see that we have this nice pop in contrast. Our greens have now gotten darker and greener. They're more saturated. And then our skin is popping off the background. We've created some contrast using the calibration tool. And now why is that creating more contrast? Because the greens are now more pure green and the other colors are now more pure other colors. And so there's more of a contrast between those two colors. The least contrast you could have in color, obviously, is going to be black and white, when everything is the same color, or there is no distinguishing contrast between colors. So using that, we can enhance our colors to create more contrast. Now we can go in here, and we're just going to grab our blues, and everything in this looks a little bit too magenta-y for me, which means that going this way is probably the opposite of what we want. We'll grab this slider and just warm those greens up. Now you could go way crazy overboard and do kind of a stylistic teal and blue look, but we're just going to try and keep this relatively natural for the sake of this video. And then our greens here, they're looking pretty yellow, so I could maybe make them a little bit more green. And we've lost some saturation as we've done that, so I'm going to compensate here. Bring maybe the reds and the blues up a little bit. Okay. And then the reds, their skin is looking pretty darn red, so I'm going to make that a little bit more orange. See how that looks. It's going to take it towards yellow. Maybe just a bit. Okay, so here's before, and here's after. Now, don't pay attention necessarily to this as the perfect edit. I've only just adjusted this and this alone. However, look at the contrast we've created in our couple, how their skin and basically the subject of this photo is just popping out a lot more. Now you might be asking yourself, couldn't we just do this with the HSL panel? That's a great question. Let's take a look here. We're going to reset everything in our calibration. Just shut that off. And then we'll start in our HSL. Maybe we'll grab our greens and our yellows. We'll pull that back. Grab our saturation here in the greens and yellows. Pull that up. Just compare. Okay, so we've got a really nice golden feel going on with our calibration version. So let's grab our hues. We'll maybe take the aquas in this direction, I think. And then we'll grab our yellows, maybe make them a little bit warmer. Oranges, maybe a little bit towards yellow. Greens, a little bit warmer. Okay, so here's our calibration, and here is our HSL. Now you might have a preference when it comes to the actual color itself, but the point here is that they're not exactly the same. So what I would encourage you to do is first adjust with your calibration, and then go in later, and in the HSL panel you can enhance that as far as you want. So we can take these yellows, maybe make them super extreme, and the greens, maybe we'll desaturate them. Saturation out of here. Maybe add some saturation to the blues because we're going crazy and we just don't care. So here is our before now, and here's our after. We can make a massive difference, and the nice part about doing this in the calibration first is that then the HSL is pure creative. We're not trying to correct anything in here. We're able to just change the colors and manipulate them however we want. Here's another example with blue this time. So we'll grab our white balance, just warm things up a little bit for this photo. That looks about right. Go to our calibration, and we will just grab our blues. We'll take the saturation up this time because we want to saturate those mountains, and take the saturation down in everything else just to balance it out until our skin tones look pretty natural. Okay, here's before and here's after. See how much pop and contrast we've added to this image? Now, of course, you could go in and you could try and replicate it in the HSL panel, which I've done ahead of time just to save you watching me do it. Here's before and here's after. But take a look at the difference in these images, the way that the highlights are kind of portrayed in each of them. Now you might have a preference, you might not, and sometimes it'll depend on the image. One will work better than others. But in this particular one, I think that the calibration version looks better because the skin is just a little bit brighter. It's popping off the background a little more, and now when I add the rest of my edits, I can go in and get lots of contrast without it looking too contrasty. Okay, let's head over to this beautiful castle. So we're going to grab our white balance, warm that up, go to our contrast, take that probably around there, don't want to go too far, and then get rid of this haze with our dehaze tool. Quick trick, don't take the dehaze too high because then you will regret it and look like a moron later, especially if you're recording a YouTube tutorial. Okay, grab the contrast, let's say that looks about right, maybe take dehaze a little bit higher. What can we get away with? You might be watching this saying, that's way too much, Ryan. In which case, let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. Okay, so this looks all right, but we've got a problem going on in our shadows. It's still pretty blue, and I can show you that by hitting this eyedropper. And when we hover over these pixels, you'll see it's pretty much a really dark blue going on in the shadows. And this is trees, it's forest. It shouldn't be blue, it should be kind of orangish, greenish, whatever. So go to our calibration, grab the shadows, and just add some magenta in there to counteract that. Then I'm going to actually warm up these greens. We'll try maybe going towards yellow a little bit. That was quite far. But you can see how the castle really pops out of the background as we do that. The image kind of takes on some new life. So we'll grab that saturation. They could probably use a little more saturation, but not too much. And then the blues, maybe somewhere around there. Oranges or reds, take those down. And saturation, I'm kind of playing around here, eyeballing it and seeing what looks good. Let's say something like this, okay? So maybe add a little bit more contrast just by lowering the blacks, raising up the whites. Something like that. Here's before, and here's after. Now we'll take our calibration, turn that off for you, and on. Now it's not making a huge, massive difference, but it is making a pretty solid difference. We already thought we had the white balance dialed in, but once you add those calibration adjustments and take them away, wow, we were way off. And just using white balance alone probably wouldn't have gotten us there. All right, just a couple last examples here. We'll go back to our forest photo. I've already grabbed the white balance and fixed that as much as I can to get rid of that green cast from the leaves. We'll go down to our calibration here, and we'll go a little bit further by taking the green saturation down, just seeing where we want the greens to land, probably around there. Grab our blues, just see what we're doing. Pump that back up. Reds, don't want to take it too far, and then if we wanted to go really crazy, we could even play with the hue of the blues to give this photo a total fall feel. Isn't that kind of interesting? We can totally transform the season with just a few clicks. So that's an easy way to add that fall look. Now, if there were people in this photo, it might not work so well because the skin tones might be silly, but you get what you pay for, right? And then we could go in here to our split toning. If you have no idea how this works, you can go ahead and watch my split toning tutorial, or you can grab these presets and just apply a split toning look with a click. Let's say that. Way over edited, but that's an example of how far you can take this thing from this to this. Okay? One last one for you. Here's an example that you'll come into all the time if you're taking photos of people, whether it's weddings or other. If you're on green grass, that green grass is reflecting, and most of the time you want your skin tones to pop nice. Well, you can grab your calibration. We're going to grab our reds, not the hue, take the saturation down, saturation of the blues down, greens all the way up. I don't know why, but for some reason this just makes the skin tones pop and everything else darker. So you can see how the grass and the green in behind the couple and on the floor here just gets so much darker. We instantly make our couple pop off the background that much more. Now we could add a little bit more saturation back into those reds. Took a little too much away. And of course, this is without any other filters applied. Normally I would go in here and I would do all of my other things. I'd add a preset. And fun fact, this preset has that kind of effect already built in. You can see I've taken the saturation down in the blues, up in the greens, and down in the reds. Here's before, and here's after. Just watch the background there. Darken it down. So that's a little trick that you can apply to your photos. And of course, if you ever want that orange and teal look, it's as simple as grabbing that blue hue, bring it down towards the bottom, grab your reds, take them towards orange, and bam, orange and teal look. And then just balance it in by grabbing that saturation and making it a little less crazy. Okay, so hopefully this video has been helpful for you in just understanding how powerful this calibration tool is and really what it's meant for, which is correcting white balance, essentially. So if you have different lighting conditions, tungsten or daylight or afternoon sun versus sunset, you know how to adjust in the calibration panel to make your colors really work and get rid of those weird color casts that are going on in your images. If this tutorial has been helpful, do me a huge favor, hit that like button, make sure to subscribe for new content and tutorials, and leave me a comment below. I would really love to hear from you. And lastly, if you want some free presets, I will leave some links in case you want to check them out. All right, I will see you in the next video. Peace.